Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 24 transfer plans. To be honest, I'm looking at Gameweek 24 as a little bit of a write-off for me. Gameweek 23 was a bad game week. I think Gameweek 24 will be a bad game week for me as well. Not because my team is in a terrible state, but just simply because I don't have the triple captainship available. I used it in Gameweek 2. We got some really nice points from it, and ultimately I'm just not going to expect that I'm going to be able to get a green arrow when most of the field has another, maybe let's say 70-80% of a Salah captaincy compared to myself, and for that reason it just feels like a little bit of a red impending, and we'll just have to hope that Salah kind of underperforms, I suppose, over these next two fixtures, which is more than plausible given that the fixtures are tough from a defensive point of view as well. And one of the themes that we talked about when we were looking at our What We've Learned series around Game Week 21 when I did that video was that Bournemouth and Everton are both top half defenses, and that's one of the benefits as well of also probably not owning a Gakpo this week, even though he absolutely destroyed me this week, and fair play. Really nice fixture. He did the goods, whereas someone like Luis Diaz, for example, in the center forward position doesn't do much. That happens from time to time in FPL. And yeah, credits to anyone who went for Gakpo. I think looking back, the main reason why I didn't want to go for Gakpo is because I didn't have two free transfers, or that rather it required two free transfers to get there, hence why I missed the boat on Gakpo. So ultimately I got 56 points, I believe, so the auto sub for Munoz is going to come in for me, which is nice. Finally, a little bit of small, minute auto sub jam, but generally a depressing experience with Odegaard so far. Now, as you guys know, I'm not really a manager who cares so much about, I guess, the outcome of what a certain player has done if I think the logic for owning that player is still there. And to be honest, I actually owned Odegaard in the Champions League. He scored there. Was looking quite forward to the Wolves away fixture. He now has City next, then West Ham and Leicester. And so when I look at those fixtures, I really am not so worried about Odegaard as a pick. The clear reality is that Mbeumo is a pick that I'm probably going to miss out on Game Week 24, and I'm highly regretful of that. But that's life sometimes. You're just not going to be able to facilitate transfers when things don't go your way. And I made two free transfers in the end. Went into Becker over Flecken, so that was already -1 points, I guess. And then I went into Calvert-Lewin, who immediately suffered a hamstring injury around 12 minutes into his match versus Brighton. So I've already made a move for this game week because there's an impending price rise for the team, and it's kind of sad, I think, in an FPL sense when things like this do happen, because you feel like the transfers are forced upon you and there's not much you can do about it. But I've been quite fortunate, I suppose, with lack of injury luck. For example, I didn't own this Lanky injury, so I can't complain too much. I've been using my free transfers when I can, and that's kind of bit me by not rolling, for example, in this week. And that shows you, I guess, the downsides as well of playing so aggressively all the time. Whereas you take a little bit more of a, I guess, conservative approach, especially considering that, let's say, Alisson versus Flecken was the only game for this game week, and it's come back to hurt me a little bit. And, you know, that's what it is. I think a lot of people will now be moving towards Gakpo, which means that double Liverpool defense is going to be the differential, I suppose, for this game week, which I still quite like, considering that one of the fixtures is Everton. Probably not ideal, given that I will be owning an Everton forward regardless, but Everton, I mean, the value to them is mostly that Leicester at home fixture. Last season, they were actually able to steal a result versus Liverpool, but I think this is a very different Liverpool as well, although Everton have markedly improved as well under Moyes. So we'll see what happens. I'm not looking to play in assistant managership, which I think a lot of people will be intrigued to kind of hear my thoughts on. I simply just don't have the free transfers to facilitate an assistant managership play. I'd like to make a lot of transfers on my team going forwards. I think Rodgers is immediately someone that I would signal as, you know, needing a transfer. Castagne is a very cheap option on my team. Don't really care about him. Munoz and Hall serviceable up until Game Week 29. Calvert-Lewin, he's gone. And Odegaard and Bruno, I don't think they really need free transfers, but I'm sure later down the line I'll be tempted by going back to Mbeumo anyways. As far as, let's say, João Pedro, Isak, João Pedro, yes, of course, has been extremely dry as a pick, but he still has good fixtures coming up, and ultimately, when he's got games like Southampton, I'll probably keep him for things like that and look to have a little bit more of a well-rounded team. Ultimately, I still think that we've seen, the funny thing about Brighton is that they've been able to sort of play towards the level of their offense almost every, or not offense, but rather their opponents almost every week. And so I guess owning João Pedro for a bad fixture doesn't feel any different to owning João Pedro for a good fixture, arguably, right? This Brighton team have really, really disappointed, not just in terms of the outcomes and the performances versus bottom half teams, but just in terms of the underlying stats. And João Pedro clearly is someone who just hasn't had great underlying numbers recently, whereas there was a sort of great purple patch when he was playing teams like City and Liverpool. So funny little player. I think because his minutes are still so good, because he's still a penalty taking option, I'm not really worried about continuing to João Pedro. I'm sure people will find a lot more value elsewhere, but as I said, with Wood having poor fixtures, I didn't really mind selling him, and ultimately all the other sort of 5.x options aren't really reliable going forwards beyond, let's say, Everton forwards for this week. And it's so clear that the midfield dynamic has completely changed because you've got 3 Bournemouth mids who are all extremely viable and really cheap. And so maybe, yes, the answer is actually to spend less in the midfield and spend more in the forward positions, and maybe structurally still stay within the 3-5-2, but just to operate with those Bournemouth mids. And I think that will be a huge theme of my transfer plans, how many Bournemouth transfers I'm going to be facilitating over the course of the next few game weeks. And it might even mean that I actually don't go for Mbeumo instead, because there's just so much value there with the Bournemouth mids, considering that they are actually playing a lot of their players for 90 minutes. And this is a different setup to, let's say, at the start of the season when Dango was not a key part of the team, when Kluivert was actually constantly getting subbed at 70 minutes, that sort of thing. So, I mean, they've improved as a team, but we also highlighted that actually a lot of their players were identified as quote unquote poor finishers at Gameweek 21, whereas over the last 2 game weeks, they've spent effectively, I think, 9 goals reversing that tail, right? Kluivert scored, Dango scored. These were players marked as poor finishers. Semenyo scored a great finish versus Chelsea, whilst not even racking up that much underlying numbers. So that's kind of, I think, the beauty of looking back at that video and sort of kind of being proud of what we're looking at in terms of using underlying stats as a basis to guide our decisions. I unfortunately didn't really envision the need to actually go for a Bournemouth mid up until game week 26. So it does feel a bit regretful that they've actually done a lot of their good work over the last 2 game weeks, but I don't think that's going to stop them from being good picks. Ultimately, they're just vastly underpriced considering the minutes are so good for 3 of their midfielders. And so that's a very interesting landscape for us in FPL, which begs the question whether you need actually so much money in the game when you actually have so much value, once again, in the midfield, giving you enough points to basically spend whatever you'd like within other positions. So that's kind of my thoughts on the team. I've still got Odegaard and Bruno. I think in a week where, let's say, Mbeumo scores a penalty, and that happens from time to time, that's the value of owning a penalty taker. Me owning 7 penalty takers in the game doesn't feel so bad whatsoever. I've already made a transfer, so if I can show you my team for next game week here, I've already made a transfer towards NDI. And yeah, I'm happy about this move because it was sort of forced upon me. It was DCL to NDI. He'll be the penalty taker, hopefully, for at least the Leicester at home fixture. Maybe they'll go into the market for another attacker, because I'm not sure if they really want to have Beto for however long, let's say, Dominic Calvert-Lewin's out for. Moyes has done really well since coming back. I've not considered him, as part of the AM strategy simply because I don't have money in the bank. I didn't plan for it and I didn't want it. But there is, of course, a small chance that if you are better equipped to free transfers than myself, then maybe going for Moyes makes sense, because who knows, the double Gameweek 25 can still be thrown out. Although I think maybe even the likelihood of Tottenham being able to reverse that tie versus Liverpool and Anfield feels dubious. So there's obviously a chance of that. But I think the slight issue is if you do go for someone like Moyes, you need to be also using free transfers to move off of Moyes if you probably want to optimize the chip. Crystal Palace away is not so bad a game, but it is an away fixture and it's not great. Although arguably I can see a lot of the merits of actually going for that Man United at home game, because Man United still look absolutely terrible, and I can see the value of maybe just holding Everton if you really believe in that strength of Everton recently. It's just not so nice, I think, that Man United are so low down the table that you don't get that sort of table bonus right now. And that's actually a funny little thing with this chip where, as the game weeks go on and as you own a manager, you moving up and down the table has huge consequences on how we think there's a valid chip strategy. So that's kind of an interesting thing. I do think AM requires a lot of transfers, hence why I think it would be better for me to actually start racking up free transfers after maybe I wildcard a little bit later into the season. And that's sort of my general plan. I still haven't actually decided on a free at 29 strategy versus a wildcard 30/31 strategy, simply because there's still so much information to be gained, like the outcome of the Carabao Cup fixtures and what that means for my team value when I'm making decisions on game week 29. Let's say if I sell more Liverpool players because they're going to blank, that's going to be a colossal hit my team value. The same thing with, let's say, selling an Isak and things like that. So those considerations have to be made, and I think better information will come. And I don't see myself actually having transfers that are very different if I go for an approach where I try to marry the two lines together for now up until at least Game Week 27. But if I go to Game Week 27, and the reason why I say Game Week 27 is because Game Week 27 is one of those fixtures where it's a nice launch off point for selling some of those Newcastle players, because there's Liverpool away. It's not a great fixture there. There are fixtures preceding that aren't good already, but I still think that ultimately, like, Fulham at home, Nottingham Forest at home is not really as bad as it looks for a team like Newcastle and for a player like Isak. Hence why I don't have any major plans in terms of selling him. But the idea of, let's say, if I go for a wildcard 30 strategy, is probably Isak towards Jackson makes sense around Game Week 27, because you're jumping on to Chelsea versus Southampton at home, Leicester at home, and it's a nice opportunity to just move off of Isak if I'm 100% certain that that's the strategy choice that I'm going to go for. It might mean that actually just delaying that decision for the Southampton game, which is not ideal, and then actually going for Game Week 28, something like Isak to Jackson instead, if I plan on wildcarding on Game Week 30, could make sense. But the alternative is also just simply keeping all these players, free hitting on 29, keeping my team value, and knowing that I'll be better for it because of, the impacts on assistant managerships and things like that. So that's kind of what my thoughts are right now with my team. I still think that the core of the team is very good, but Rodgers doesn't look great. Bruno and Odegaard can clearly be Mbumo or a Bournemouth midfielder as well. But there aren't too many forwards that I really like in the game, and I think that's kind of why I'm not super upset about the idea of me selling Wood this week, and also me continuing to hold João Pedro as part of a general strategy. And owning penalty takers is always a nice thing, because you can have a team play awful, you can have a player in open play awful, and you can still get value from that. And I think that's kind of what Mbumo proved today with the kind of Crystal Palace game. I don't think he was particularly involved, right? That's been a theme of Mbumo this season too, with his open play numbers, but he's gotten a lot of penalties, and hopefully some of my players will get some penalties in recent weeks. Hence why I'm pretty happy with the team as it stands. And once again, no Gakpo is a reality. Do I feel the need to take a -4, -8 for Gakpo? Absolutely not, because I'm still happy with owning Alisson for what is the run until 29, right? There's still going to be good fixtures on the horizon, like Wolves, like Newcastle, like Southampton at home. Sorry, not Newcastle at home, but like Southampton, etc. So those kind of games are nice on paper to own Alisson for, and so that's the idea, right? Owning a double defense from a team that's actually very, very strong in defense. And even though they haven't been keeping clean sheets lately, it's very similar to, let's say, the Arsenal situation, where I'd still bet most of my money, I suppose, if I was going to, on Arsenal keeping cleans in relatively medium difficulty fixtures. And so that's kind of why I'm happy with spending that much money on Alisson and Flecken. And just going back to the point in Game Week 29, I've now set myself up where, yes, I'm spending a lot of money on goalkeepers, but Flecken now ensures me from a Liverpool blank in Game Week 29 if I choose to just simply dead end on that team. So that's kind of my thoughts in terms of what my team is like now. Some of the other players have recently been sold, like Palmer. I still think he's just got amazing fixtures, so I'm not worried about him. Isak, I think I'm not going to sell now, but I think some people will be considering selling now, particularly because they might have slightly weaker team value, and I think that's okay as well. He's been an absolute menace so far, and I think a lot of people will sort of judge the Isak decision if people choose to sell him, but he's another player where I think, yeah, when you look at fixtures, there's some value in maybe considering an Isak to Gakpo type of move on this game week, simply because of the upside of being able to move your team around and restructure it really with a transfer like that, and the amount of money you get back from Isak. But you do lose, of course, that in the bank value, which is very crucial, and that kind of does, I think, influence some of my decisions later down the line. As far as, let's say, a Rodgers, I mean, he does stick out as me as the player that I don't love the most in my team, because first of all, his blank is going to be tied towards Liverpool, and ultimately the fixtures after Ipswich at home aren't great. But if I really want to go for a Bournemouth midfielder, I might as well just go for the Bournemouth midfielder in Game Week 25, because I just think the Bournemouth midfielders are just that much better. That's not to say that Rodgers is a bad pick, but it's just that I think the Bournemouth mids are just overwhelmingly good. And maybe, yes, it is a little bit of FOMO because they've just performed really well versus two top teams over the last two fixtures, but their underlying stats are in a league of their own, particularly Dango and Semenyo. And then Kluivert obviously is on penalties, which you can't really compare that to Rodgers, who also will probably be struggling going forwards because of the amount of depth that Aston Villa have. You've got someone like Malin who's now ready to play minutes, when Diaz getting slightly more minutes than I'd actually expect, even though he's been really poor this season, clearly because he's just working his way back to full fitness. and everyone is just fit, even though they've sold Philogene. So yeah, he's the problem point in my team. But I think when a problem point in my team is someone who's 5.x million, I think that's fine. I can live with that. Right, so switching gears, we're now with the Gameweek24 team pick and rating tool with the Fantasy Football Hub app. You can actually have a look at it yourself in the description below. There's still a free trial offer this month in January, so please do make use of it whilst it still is in existence. And if you want to continue to use it, feel free to, of course, subscribe. If you don't, you can obviously cancel and look at having a use of the tools at a different time. But I think they offer a great variety of tools, and it's a good time in the season as well, with many sort of leagues still in flux. A lot of chip strategy kind of thoughts being implemented. You can actually use your chip strategy as part of the suggestion tools. A lot of the suggested transfers can be predicated on various chip strategies. So you can kind of look at the idea of maybe solving what your team would look like over the next few game weeks with different chip strategies in mind, or even different transfers in mind. So I find that quite interesting. What I've done so far is I've already pre-booked the NDIA transfer within my team. So he joins. The game week rating isn't great, to be honest. I think, look, I can be honest and say I don't have a great team for this game week. And it's a little bit upsetting, but I think that's what happens when you have to solve one injury issue and you don't have Mbumo in your team for Tottenham at home. So what can I do? Just going to have to suck it up. What I think is actually quite interesting is that the Fantasy Football Hub model seems to have actually picked up on a little bit of a shift in terms of Odegaard's expected points, which is nice. Nice to see him not looking like an extremely sour, poor pick, and that's a good thing. But the Bournemouth midfielders do exist, and they kind of make a mockery of, let's say, the Bruno and the Odegaard price tag. So I guess it's not that funny, ultimately. So this is what my team would look like in Gameweek24. Not too controversial. I think even some of the benchings, I would probably actually play Rodgers over João Pedro, because I just think, yeah, João Pedro versus Nottingham Forest away doesn't scream like a great fixture. I need to reassess what happens with Rodgers, because if he plays, let's say, another full 90 in the Champions League, that's not exactly, I guess, a great sign in terms of the load for Wolves. But look, I'd still rather play the Wolves fixture on Rodgers and probably take the L on João Pedro. On my bench, he can haul, given that I guess it's a tough game on paper. I'm sure he will. On Game Week 25, though, we just shift gears to that, and I optimize my team. Yeah, I mean, this is a week where I think the team looks pretty strong. You've got Bruno versus Tottenham, which now looks like a good game, because any game versus Tottenham is. Odegaard actually has two really good fixtures. So suddenly, if I move on from Game Week 24, I don't think I miss Mbumo too much, but Mbumo himself will have West Ham away, and I believe a Leicester away fixture. It's nice that they're away games for Mbumo, because that probably makes me less regretful, I suppose, the idea of passing up on him. But on a fixture like this, or a game week like this, where actually Odegaard and Bruno both have good games, I think Rodgers is still the one that I'd probably like to sell. And the one that I'd like to sell him for is actually going to be Dango Ouattara. Now, it seems like obviously the model needs a little bit of updating in terms of how good Dango is and how good his minutes are, because he's been clocking in 90s so far. A little point on Kluivert and Semenyo, I can't afford them, right? Simple answer. But I think one of the key points on Dango to mention is that with the kind of current issues that they have, the only concern that I'd really have is Evan Nilsson, who I think, if I remind myself, has already done surgery for the season. So it does seem like maybe his season is still, for the most part, over. Dango's been playing really well in the center forward position. And I think a key thing that's been nice is that we know that Bournemouth rotate when they kind of have bodies available that allow for some of the players to get subbed, right? That's why Kluivert traditionally didn't play 90s. But crucially, I don't think there's anyone who can really do what Dango does in the center forward position. It's really just Jefferson, right? And he's a huge drop-off from some of the other players. And so I do think that Dango's minutes, really for the foreseeable, should be really good. And I don't mind just owning Dango, right? The alternative is take hits to go for some other players and go for players like Mbumo, etc. But as you can see, my team does look really good coming out of Game Week 24. So Game Week 24 is definitely a week where I expect to suffer, and I will suffer. But actually going for Dango is something that's really nice in my team. And I don't really mind selling Rodgers for that, even though Rodgers himself is Ipswich at home. And we've seen Ipswich actually look really, really poor recently versus teams like Liverpool and City. And just generally in open play, the transition has been a little bit too easy. But Dango's Dango. I quite like him as a transfer for this week. I still don't see the opportunity to necessarily sell Odegaard or Bruno here, because if I don't sell Bruno on Game Week 24, I think I do end up holding Bruno, because the idea of holding Bruno for Game Week 29 is also quite nice, because he has a really good fixture then, and I can manage after that. With Game Week 26, though, this is where there is maybe an opportunity to go for a Mbumo, but I'm still a little bit cold on that. What I would like to do now is around Game Week 26, start to save some free transfers, right? We know that Newcastle don't have particularly good games after Game Week 26, so this is an opportunity where I really should be rolling, in my opinion. I can optimize the moves here. It's most likely that I'll actually be playing this team as it stands. Maybe I could play Castagna over Munoz if I'm really buying into the Fulham, I guess, clean sheet aspect. But you've got a João Pedro fixture here. I will be playing Dango, of course. What am I looking at? I'll definitely be playing Dango, and I'll bench Munoz. But on Game Week 27, this is a fixture window where, as I said, it does feel like a week where you want to commit, but actually you get more information in terms of how to manage FPL and the landscape there on Game Week 28 instead. So yes, I'm going to have a bad team on paper for this game week, but I think it still makes sense to actually make it all the way towards Game Week 28 instead, where you can actually make better informed decisions because you'll actually have FA Cup impacts as well on your team that you can look forward to, and then you can manage the landscape after that. Because crucially, we will know Game Week 29, Game Week 33 after Game Week, well, during Game Week 24 to 25. So that's a big decision window where, who knows, we might get a surprise double Game Week on 25. We might also get some information in terms of Game Week 33 just because you know the blanks and etc. and how they're built. But around Game Week 28 is where you actually know a little bit more of the landscape after that, where you have some FA Cup knockouts. You can actually calculate the probabilities of, you know, the next double and blank as well in the 30, like past 33. So that's actually something that's quite interesting, and why I think it does make sense for a lot of us to save transfers up until Game Week 28 and then actually decide on a chip strategy. You might actually be able to decide on a chip strategy beforehand, and actually investing into a chip strategy early sometimes does give you a lot of rewards. Although I will remind everyone here that I did do that last season, and it was absolutely brutal when I did go for a wildcard 26, because you never know, things can go brutally out of your favor, not just in terms of, let's say, FA Cup outcomes, but then also, I guess, wildcarding into 4 injuries. So let's not think about that this season. I suppose 27 is once again an opportunity, as I said, to just jump on Chelsea because it's such a tempting way or period to go out of Isak. But even if I look at, let's say, a team like Liverpool as well, when I look at their fixtures, I mean, Game Week 26 could also be an opportunity to maybe sell someone like Trent if you really want to. But I think it really just comes down to whether you're set in stone with chip strategies, because I don't really love the idea of selling Newcastle and Liverpool players. They're just such good teams that, yeah, okay, sure, I can get some value in moving in between some teams that don't actually blank in Game Week 29 a little bit ahead of the curve, but is there actually that much of an upside for doing so? And when I have such team value, do I really need to consider that? I would say no. So my general idea is to make those transfers for the Bournemouth midfielder because I just prefer Dango over Rodgers, and then actually to take a little bit more of a passive approach after Game Week 25 and to kind of see where the chips fall, so that on Game Week 28 I can basically plan out the full landscape 29 plus, and I'll know when I'll wildcard already here. I'll know when I'll be free hitting already here, and it's going to be also a good opportunity to kind of assess what the league table is at, because we can then judge what a good assistant manager opportunities with the fixture future team slate. That's also kind of why I want to hold up the AM chip, because I still see that 31 and 33 is good opportunities to use AM. So is 36 and 38. But we can make that decision a little bit later, particularly since I already know that I'm going to skip out on AM24. But to those of you who are actually going AM24, best of luck to you. One thing that was actually really well pointed out by Andy Let's Talk FPL is that you can't actually change your assistant manager around during a game week. You need to choose the manager that you actually want to use in the game week already as your free transfer. Otherwise, you literally need to be using free transfers to move the manager on that same game week. So I would not recommend doing that. And as the pick and rating tool has actually moved all the way back to Game Week 24, this is a good time to kind of end the video here. Thank you guys so much for watching. The transfer plans are a little bit dry. It's one of those weeks where my transfers are forced upon me. I hope you guys have saved up more free transfers than myself and have planned better than myself, and all the best to you for doing that and benefiting from those sorts of decisions. Otherwise, take care, goodbye, and I'll see you guys soon.